I'm super excited to be joined by Donald Taylor himself, the face of learning tech, recently been called the Pope of L&D, all-round L&D legend, but more importantly for today's session, the author of the Global Sentiment Survey. For those of you who are not familiar with the survey, it's really a great insight into what's on L&D's mind. Asks a very important question and really does start to give us an idea of what's changing, what's front of mind, what are people talking about. And that's exactly what we're going to break down, and I'll come to that. For those of you who don't know me, whenever I say that line, I feel like I'm about to make a best man speech. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nelson. I'm one of the founders and the CEO at HowNow. We're a learning and skills platform. A whole range of organizations use us to figure out what skills they need, what skills they have, and how to bridge the gap with relevant learning. If you want to know more about the platform, feel free to get in touch. We'll tell you a bit more towards the end. I'm also the author of Learning at Speed. If you've not read that book, do check it out. And I'm also the co-host and L&D Disrupt, a podcast by HowNow, where we bring some really interesting disruptive thinkers and pick their brain. Don, are you about to show my book cover? There you go.
We are, yeah. So it's one of the few books I keep within easy reach. It is a good book, well worth reading, Learning at Speed. It's practical, now I'm going to have to, and it gets you going.
I'm going to have to split my royalties with you now, Don, for that. But like I said, there's a lot we're going to cover. And so just to give you a heads up on what we've got in store for you today, we're going to kick things off with Don breaking down the findings from the GSS survey and really looking at what are those overarching themes that are coming out of it and what does it mean for you. Then I'll be breaking down a bit more tactical and practical things that we're seeing organizations do and how they're changing their approach to be able to connect learning in a more meaningful way to organizational needs and to have meaningful business impact. But this isn't just about you hearing from me and Don. This is just as much about hearing from you. Of course, the chat is open. Feel free to share your thoughts, your comments, your questions, whatever's on your mind, get it off your chest. But what we will also be doing is breaking out into having discussions. It is Chatham House rules. You know, it's a safe space, share, discuss, reflect. But this is really about you taking away something that you can then action and apply within your organizations. Any questions, pop them in the chat. But really, really looking forward to this session. Over to you, Don, to kick things off.
Brilliant, Nelson. Thanks so much. I always enjoy chatting with Nelson because he's a genuine guy who really cares about what we do in this field and is doing good work to improve it. I've got something like 9 minutes to summarize the Global Sentiment Survey. I'm going to crack on with that. Just one thing, Nelson mentioned the Chatham House rule there, which is by all means mention what you heard afterwards. You just can't say who said it. So that's how we play things here. I'm going to share with you a quick overall summary of the Global Sentiment Survey. And then we're going to go into some breakout rooms to discuss one important question to do with it. So that's me. I want to say a big thank you to HowNow, who, as well as putting on this webinar, were one of the sponsors of the survey, making it possible to go out and reach our audience. There are other sponsors as well and media partners. Thank you very much to them for making it possible for the survey to run. Just want to give you a very quick background to it. Then we're going to jump into what I think, well, there are three key results from it. There's one key thing I want to set up to go into the breakout rooms, which is all about value. So the survey, you may know, shares a question, and it's been the same question for the last 12 years, which is what will be hot in workplace learning and development in the coming years. So it's been the same format, as I say, of question for the past 12 years. We give people a list of 16 things, and they can choose up to 3 things from it. I say up to 3 things. 95% of people choose 3 things. Survey, as I say, has been going for 12 years. We've got something like 3,500 people voting each year from something like 100 countries. Without going too much into the background and everything, I just want to get straight to the results. This is the results from this year. And I want to break that down a bit for you because they are, you might say, Don, looking at this, there is only one thing that's important here, which is that artificial intelligence is number one. The number in brackets is the number that this option was at last year. It was number one last year, Donald. And look, it's got 22.6%, which is way more than the next thing on the list. Let's not talk about anything other than AI. I'm going to talk about AI very briefly, but I want to also dwell on the other stuff on the survey and draw out one thing about value, which is buried in here. So the other things on this table are, well, you've got the option, you've got the position it was last year. Here's the vote. And here you've got an arrow saying, is it up or down in comparison with last year? This year, because I noticed something strange about the votes, it's if it's got a circle around it, it's green. That means it was a big jump going upwards. Big jump going downwards is a red circle around a red arrow. So you can see that there are most things going downwards, and that's because artificial intelligence collected more votes this year than last year. But there are a few things you'll notice going up. They're the green arrows. And that's where the real value of this survey lies. Our key takeaway, as I've said, AI dominates the survey. Once again, I say again because it was number one last year with a vote of 21.5%, which was the biggest vote that anything has ever had on the survey. And the previous biggest vote we had was 13%. So you get an idea of how big that is. Is AI unstoppable? I don't think so. I just want to share something with you before we go on. Here's the vote for AI. It's been on the survey since 2017, but here it is for the past 5 years, and it's spread across 4 geographies. And you can see at the beginning that it's all clumped together. In 2021, nobody really cared. 2022, again, nobody really cared. But in 2023, it separated out. Brazil and Ireland are traditionally technological and particularly AI skeptics. They still didn't care about it in 2023. USA tends to lead the world on technologies, and this is the votes in the rest of the world. So you can see here, USA took off. The rest of the world came along for the ride. Brazil, Ireland, still not sure. Next year, and this was ChatGPT came out just before the survey launched here in 2023. 2024, bang, everybody's on the AI bandwagon. 2025, we saw that the vote went up for AI this year. And you can see that it did go up for almost every country, but not all of them. And the key thing here is that USA's vote actually dropped. Why is that significant? Because we've seen in the past that where the USA leads, the rest of the world follows. And we've seen that many times in the past, in many different instances. So this is not a one-off thing. That drop suggests to me that this will continue as a trend next year for the USA, and the rest of the world will probably follow. I have no doubt that AI will be number one on the survey for 2026, but I think it won't have an increased vote. So I think the tide is turning with AI, and I think people are getting a bit more realistic about what L&D can be doing with it. There's another question we ask. There's only 2 key questions on the survey. The first one is that what's hot question. The second one is this one. What's your biggest challenge for the year? Well, we asked this question the last 4 years. And last year, 60 people, it's a free text field. So you can write what you want, okay? In 2024, 60 people just pressed 3 keys on the keyboard. A, I, return. And that's what 60 AIs look like. So bang, that was people's response. They could write what they wanted to, but that was all they wrote. AI is my biggest challenge. So what I'm saying is that last year, there was a clear sense that people were in a state of shock about AI. Not this year. This year, only 3 people did that. Lots of people wrote about AI, but it's much more nuanced. Our second big takeaway from the survey this year is that data and skills hold on. Just want to mention this very quickly before we get on to the question of value. The key thing about data and skills here is that although AI is absorbing all our attention here, reskilling and upskilling, this option here, came on to the survey 5 years ago. It has been number 1 or number 2 every year it's been on the survey. So it is clearly very important for people. And skills-based talent management has been at number 3 position for the past 3 years. So although AI is taking up so much attention right now, we shouldn't underestimate that skills are very much part of people's thinking. And in fact, these top 5 all require data, and they are very much about skills. So let's not, and they're underpinned by AI. And Andy's got a very good point there about the Gartner hype cycle. I've got data which suggests it's completely on track for AI. I'm not sharing it right now. I'm going to wait for a year or two. But yes, Andy, I think it is. So that's our second key takeaway: data and skills holding on and remain important to L&D internationally. Finally, those three green arrows that we spotted at the beginning, big jumps up for consulting with the business, showing value, and performance support. These are three options that perform a bit differently to the other options over time. And these are the only three that have gone up. They're associated together in people's minds. I think they're associated like this. Let's first consult with the business, then we'll do something to support performance, and finally, we'll show the value we've created. These three have performed differently over time. This graph, these arrows going up and down show us that there's been an increase this year in the vote, but they don't show us what the vote was and how much it increased. So let's just see how that looks. Here are the changes this year versus last year. And you can see at the bottom, these are the ones which are losing a vote or losing some votes. And you can see it's a sort of half a Christmas tree shape. It's what you'd expect. You'd expect that shape to be echoed in the top. It would look something like this. Some things go up a little bit and some things go up a lot. That's not what happened. Here's how the shape actually shifted. Personalization picked up a few votes, everything else, bang. It's like, these are the things we're worried about, and these are the things we're going to vote for. Everything else doesn't matter. We haven't seen this shape before, where there's a real unanimity. Everyone's agreed across the world, this is what's important. And I want to show you how this works, because it goes back to that question I asked earlier. What's your biggest challenge? In the past, and those are the three options, which are the what I call the value trio: showing value, consulting, and performance support. In the past, these options have behaved different from normal. Normally, things trend downwards over time. Things start off as hot and exciting. They end up as business as usual, or something we were interested in, but now not so much. The value trio has looked like it was going to trend downwards over time. But for the past, or for a 5-year period, there was a period where it didn't do that, but it actually trended upwards very slightly, unlike everything else on the survey. And then last year, what happened? Bang, a big shock. It dropped downwards. But this year, we saw what happened. It bounced back up again. And these three options are the only things that bounce back up again. Very interesting that it should be only those three internationally that bounced up. Lots of possible reasons for it that I'm not going to discuss, because we want to get into discussion as quickly as possible. I just want to make the point that we've got three things happening here: a period of predictability, the AI shock, when people said, I don't know what's happening, but AI is a problem, AI recovery, telling me that value of all the things on that list are the things that I want to vote for and that I think are important. And that's true pretty much internationally. So what the survey is telling us is that AI is important. Yes, data and skills are very important as well, and that people are coming back to this idea of value being important. That's enough from me, though. I'm going to stop sharing those slides. And what I'd like to do is, well, probably hand over to Nelson to share a question that we'd like to have in the breakout rooms that we're going to go into. So what's going to happen is we're going to go into a breakout room. You'll be put in automatically. You don't have to do anything. We're going to be in there for 8 minutes. And what I'd love you to do is discuss these questions. We've just seen how important value is for people. What are the obstacles around showing value in your organization? And if you have none, fabulous. I'd like to know what you're doing. In that group, I'd love one person to write a summary. Doesn't have to be long, a summary of what you decide, and then we'll drop it into the chat when we come out of it. You'll get a 1-minute warning just before we're going to pull everybody back out. There we go. All right, so I think we're ready to go, and we're going to go into the breakout rooms now. So please go ahead. I look forward to getting your ideas in a few minutes. Okay, if you're still in the main room and you're not part of one of those breakout rooms, there should be a little window, a little pop-up on your screen saying, please join, you've been invited to join a breakout room. And please do click on it to accept the invitation and jump into that breakout room to have the discussion, because this is the key thing, understanding what you're doing, what other people are doing around showing value in your organization. All right, so we've got, I've had a direct message from one person saying, I can't join right now because I'm traveling and I'm enjoying listening. And I think that's quite legitimate. You know, you could be on the move and you can't really, I don't know, maybe you're on a train, you've got a noisy background or whatever. So in that case, I'm going to suggest, Nelson, that you and I, and anybody else who wants to, just turn their microphones off and we have a discussion here about the issues around demonstrating value. And let's share our thoughts. And then when people come back into the main room, we can see whether they agree and what they think. So Nelson, I'm going to throw the ball over to you. Go on. What are the challenges around showing value?
Yeah, I think, well, let's start with the data piece, Don. You kind of highlighted, you know, the need for data. And often in the conversations we have with learning and development teams, it's the organization itself might not have the right infrastructure in place to make this data accessible. And even when the data is accessible, we find there's an element of you achieve what you measure, right? Like it's a bit like you're going to measure 10,000 steps. It's likely you're going to do 10,000 steps. But if you're measuring the wrong thing and you're still just looking at kind of completion rates and clicks, then actually you're not measuring the metrics that are going to help you tell that story. And often we find the reason organizations are struggling to demonstrate that value is they're not measuring the things that can help them tell that story in the first place. The other thing we typically find is where L&D operates in a bit more of a silo, they find it a bit more challenging. Where you're not.
What do you mean? I mean, I think I know what you mean, but what do you mean by operating in a silo?
Yeah, so where essentially L&D are coming up with a plan, pushing out their training programs and content, and tracking metrics that they have access to, like completion rate, time spent learning, versus more partnering and collaboration with other business teams and working with them, not just to come up with what the needs are and to come up with a solution, but also to access metrics, right? Like if I'm trying to upskill my sales team, I probably need to work with my sales leader in order to access metrics around, is it improving the sales performance or not? And I think
so you've defined being in a silo by, well, we haven't got access to the data, which is quite correct, but that's a result, isn't it? That's a symptom of something else, which is the attitude of the organization towards the L&D department. And if they see the L&D department as something that just fulfills training requests, they're never going to be giving them the data to help them understand about the impact. So what's the answer, Nelson?
I also think, Don, just on that point, it's also true the other way around. I think sometimes we speak to L&D teams who see themselves as, well, I shouldn't have access to this, or they box themselves as my role here is just to do X, and that X is quite limiting in terms of the far-reaching impact they potentially could have. But interested there, Don, you obviously shared these insights with quite a few groups of people. Are there any common obstacles that you hear in discussions you've done?
I think that there's a very good book by Nigel Harrison, two very good books by Nigel Harrison. He's a chartered psychologist who, the first one is How to Be a True Business Partner. And he was helping people move from being sort of fulfillment house people to actually being performance consultants. And his second book was Dealing with Manipulation, because he found very often people were not consciously necessarily, but unconsciously manipulating people to put them in a position where they understood that their role was to accept an order rather than to be a business partner. And it was how to change that conversation. There are some very small practical things you can do, and there are some other bigger things to do with how you hold yourself, if you like, how you raise your profile internally. We know that we have to speak the language of business. We know we have to get the data, but the key thing is to put yourself in a position where other people take that ambition seriously. And I think a lot of that is about showing yourself as someone who cares about much more than just the learning side of the business. In organizations that have done it successfully, Nelson, we've got about 1 minute to go before people regroup. So in organizations that have done it well, what have you seen as the common characteristics?
Yeah, I think it requires someone to almost rebrand what learning and development is inside their organization, right? If you imagine an organization for years and years have really looked at L&D as, like you said, a training factory, predominantly chasing them to complete their compliance. Yeah, that's not going to change overnight. So you need to change that perception, tell a different story, and requires to build that momentum. So the teams that we've seen do that well essentially rebrand, and that is very much a marketing exercise of telling them what you're about, what value you're there to offer, and being able to tell a different narrative to the business as a whole versus individuals, so individuals know what's in it for them. We've seen as a big part of driving that change, and then also having the right infrastructure in place to do it, right? Because you could have the ambition, but if you don't have the tools to be able to support that, you're almost setting yourself up for failure. And then people think, oh, maybe this approach wasn't right in the first place. And people jump to big conclusions.
Just to be quite clear, when we say marketing, that could, I mean, I completely agree, by the way. And the people I've seen do this very well are what I would call entrepreneurial. They see themselves as being people who are responsible for a bit of a business that they are passionate about. And they market it, absolutely. It doesn't mean that they are being superficial in the marketing.
That's
doesn't
right.
mean they're being light or they think it's unimportant. But on the contrary, they are positioning it as something of value, which exactly. It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, let's not give compliance a bad word. I mean, I know people beat up compliance, but very often you need it to run the business. So it's a fair thing to be doing.
All right. Should we bring people in?
I've asked our fabulous production team if we could bring them back in now. I think that'd be wonderful. And I'd like anybody in the room right now to know, is there anything you'd like to add in the chat or verbally while we're here? We're going to give them 1 minute to come back in. I appreciate people may not want to turn on the microphones, which is why they didn't join the breakout room. But if you want to add anything in the chat, feel free to do so. For me, these conversations with people from all over the world, bringing in their perspectives about what they're really doing, is what you want to hear.
Yeah. Well, we've got people coming back in.
Fabulous, very exciting, always. I'm hoping that people have written summaries of what happened in their group, ready to drop into the chat. And I did say that, but verbal instructions don't always stick when you're doing something online. So I've got my big clock app, which I love. It turns your phone into a big clock, and that's what I use to keep myself on track. So if anybody, as we went into the discussion, I did say, is it possible for somebody to write a summary of what happened in their room? And if you've done that and you could drop it into the chat, that would be brilliant. Love to hear that. Salsan says group 4 had a great chat. Oh, Joelle's come in with, okay. So firstly, look, I like this. Oh, wow. Look at this. Oh, this is gold coming into the chat. Joelle says, not easy to identify the metrics. That's a really common one, Nelson, is that, we always see examples around sales, but very often training is around things which are much more difficult. And the data issue, that's something you raised, Nelson. Communication between the learning team and being okay with not seeing immediate results for important topics. That ability, Joelle, that ability to deal with ambiguity and play the long game, absolutely something I'm seeing in well-run L&D teams. But it is difficult. You've got to be ready to do it. Michelle says, look, Nelson, what do you think about Michelle's points? L&D isn't used to tracking things. We create it, we roll it out, we say that was good training. Is that something you see when you talk to people?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to what you're saying, Don, around kind of fulfillment center or content factory, where it's kind of we procure stuff or we make stuff, and then what happens with that stuff is someone else's problem, which can't sustain, right? But yeah, can definitely see that.
I love that. By the way, I don't want to belittle these very important conversations. In fact, it makes me feel quite sad, but Michelle's absolutely right when she says not tracking learning transfer as it's harder. And it's that sense that it's a bit hard to do some of these things. And what we're going to do is opt for the things which are not just simpler to do, but also where existing mechanisms exist for it. I've got something that tells me a course took place and people did it, great. And, everyone's busy, so that's enough. But it's not enough. That's the trouble. Michael also saying it was a great discussion took place. Any other things coming in, that'd be great. Knowing where to start and indeed where to find the data. That's a bit of a common theme that's coming through, Nelson. Data immaturity across the organization, says Lauren. A general summary from Ellie. The challenge is to be able to collect the relevant data and metrics. We didn't set this up this way, Nelson, but everyone seems to be saying data. Good news, says Jason, where skills development is a key part of the company's strategy, making value easy to see, but not having sufficient data. Thank you so much. I'm going to take some time after this to sit down and read these properly, but I don't want to get in the way of the discussion. Has anybody got some thoughts? They want to turn the microphone on and share something that people felt about passionately when they were in the room together. Anybody want to just go live with their microphone and share some thoughts? Super stuff here.
Okay, I can't hold it any longer.
Go on.
So it was quite good to see all those chats, because actually that's people referencing data. And in our group, we actually came to the conclusion that actually the data, the value, all of that's actually interlinked.
Yes.
And when people say things like, well, we don't know where the data is, or it's hard to measure, I would actually come back with, I think the root of the problem is that we don't qualify a learning need properly. So I will use some sales terms, apologies, because I run enablement and learning all together. So I think that sometimes we don't start with the why, like why are we actually doing this? What are we trying to solve? Because if we understand what we're trying to solve, it makes us make a clearer solution that can actually address that problem, but also it will allow us time to identify how we're going to measure that and what's the value that we bring. And I think that sometimes we fall into the trap of, oh, someone's come and asked us something, brilliant, we'll do it, great, we've done it. But the measuring it is the after effect, yes, or the after action. And I think that there's a massive gap in L&D in terms of skills. So because they've never had to go down this road before. So I do think that there's something that we need to fix.
All right, Penny, the $64 million question. What's the answer? How do we fix it?
Upskill them on data. I'm doing my bit.
Elle-Marie, let's bring in Elle-Marie. Come on, Elle-Marie's got a hand up. Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. Good, yes.
If I'm on mute. Sorry, it's a bit slow, like everything else in South Africa. My challenge currently is that, sure, that threw my train of thought off completely now. My challenge with regards to training is that we're training or measuring activity in training. Training is done, period. Yeah. And that's not appropriate anymore. What we want to do is measure the appropriate training in the right places and the right times. And that it gets to people timeously quick enough, and we can train them up and see how effective that training was. That's the measurement gap that we have. So we know the activity of training is being measured. That's what I can do currently. But I cannot make sure that I can forecast that this training gap is in that career path or in that pathway, and that it is measurable and effective for in that role at the end of the day. That's the current problems we're having across a very global organization.
I've got a quick question for you. We're going to go on to Lee in a second, and then we're going to go on to the next bit. I'm just so excited. I love all these views from around the world. Elle-Marie, just one question for you. You said it's not enough anymore. And I think you're right. I think things have changed. What, in your view, has changed?
In my view, is the fact that we're now wanting more purposeful training and outcomes.
Yeah.
Before we'd assume it has been done, people can do it. They've been trained, therefore they can do the job. But now we're looking at global reach out companies, multinationals that have got a footprint across the world. How do I manage training effectively for every single person across the globe and ensure that those people are all on the same page and aligned with the same standard of delivery on a specific training objective?
What this is telling me is that training and people and their skills is actually being seen as being much more important and taken more seriously than the past. And perhaps, to Penny's point earlier, well, do we have the skills to deal with that? I'm not sure. Lee, over to you, and then we're going to jump back to Nelson and we're going to go forward. Thank you so much for that, Elmarie. Go on, Lee.
No, thank you. So my take kind of, I'm making the assumption that I do have a clear need. I am we are understanding the business problem properly. And that value to the organization is ROI, it is productivity efficiencies, it's the SLAs, the KPIs that we see every day used in the contact centers, or you kind of get where I'm going. But for me, I think it is more about reaching out and collaborating with those areas of the business to understand what data is demonstrating this problem, and then having the confidence to use the data afterwards, reevaluate, continue that work with them, reevaluate where they are 2 weeks, 3 months, however long you need down the line post learning, after we've delivered the solution, and using that. Yes, it is scary to be presenting a data set that you're not necessarily familiar with in the day-to-day, or that you aren't, the link could be considered tenuous.
Yes.
But I think for us, it's about actually calling out there are going to be several different factors in this that contribute to an improvement. But overall, this is what we're taking from, this is what we chose as our data points as L&D and client. This is how we're measuring it.
And Andy, in the chat, Andy sort of is reflecting that, saying data value means different things to different people. It's a multidimensional thing, and we have to decide what we mean by it, and we have to have that conversation, as Penny was saying earlier, before we go into the business of then, well, hopefully having the skills. And I like that word, the confidence, to go back and present a case. Look, we could chat around the world with everybody from Leeds to Joburg about what's happening, but we're going to get on with there he is, the man himself, Nelson, going to take us forward to the next bit. Nelson, over to you.
So much good stuff, and just an hour is not enough, is it? But we're going to try to do this, and the purpose of this is to get the conversation going. Obviously, we can continue it outside of this, but kind of jumping off from what the data says, what I wanted to dive into is how is this supported in the organizations that we're working with, and what's the change in approach, and what are they doing about this? So let's dive into that. So it's probably unsurprising that the value trio is back, because if you look at it, L&D are under more pressure than ever before, fueled largely by a lot of macro changes that we're seeing in the world. So let's start with, you've got your CEO now who's feeling FOMO, because there's a lot of exponential change happening in the world, and they want to make sure they're innovating, competing, and have the people in the business to be able to deliver and win this competition. They don't want to fall behind. And therefore, they're turning to learning and development and HR teams and going, look, what's stopping us from innovating? Do we have the people? Do we have the talent? Do we have the skills? What are you doing about it? Show me the ROI of the work that you're doing. So CEO wants impact. There's also a lot of pressure financially. And so now every pound, dollar you spend, they want to see that it's having some kind of meaningful impact. So CEOs are putting on pressure on L&D. Now, if CEOs have got FOMO, people in general have got FOBO, a new term that came out at the back of Davos, which is the fear of becoming obsolete. And what's incredible is a Gallup survey found that 20% of people who were surveyed said they had the fear of becoming obsolete. Now, what was really interesting was it wasn't just people who had been in the workforce for a very long time. It was people who were entering the workforce also had the fear of becoming obsolete. So this is people who've just graduated with a degree coming into the workplace and feel like their skills are already close to being obsolete because of the rate of change. And so what that means is you've now got a workforce who has very low tolerance for learning for the sake of learning. So if you push training to the employees, they're going to turn around and ask you, well, what is this helping me do? How is this helping me do my job? How is this helping me progress in my career? They're a lot more demanding than any other workforce we've had, and for the right reasons. So employees want growth. And then you've got the poor people managers sitting in a corner crying out for help because they're on the front line of this demanding workforce who are saying, listen, you got to help me grow. You got to help me get the skills I need to do the job. What are you going to do to help me? And the manager is sitting there going, well, I don't know really what skills you need to have, how to help you get those skills. They're turning around to L&D and going, L&D, where are you? Can you help me respond to the demands that I'm getting? So it's unsurprising with all of this pressure that the value trio is back. Now, what do L&D do in this moment in time? They go to ChatGPT for help. No, I'm kidding. Well, what they're doing is they're probably sitting there going, well, do I need more content? Do I need more fun and interactive content? But what we need to recognize is the problem really isn't about what we're doing. It's about what we're not doing. So let's look at my beautiful pyramid here. Now, what this beautiful pyramid shows is at the top of the pyramid, you've got what the business needs to do. Every business has some form of mission and a strategy around how they're going to achieve that mission. And they've got objectives that help them measure whether they're on track to achieving that mission or not. Then you've got a big gap, and then you've got L&D. You've got the learning initiatives at the bottom of the pyramid, which are disconnected. And essentially, it's this kind of content factory or program factory that's pushing things out, a bit like L&D bingo. L&D are calling out a number. Some people have the number. It matches, great. Most often it doesn't. Every time the numbers don't match, you waste a lot of money, resources, and time. That gap is what we call activity without impact. Now, what does that look like in your organization? It looks like an employee who's overwhelmed with loads of stuff thrown at them, but nothing is really meaningful and relevant. And so you get to an employee engagement survey, and they're still saying they feel unsupported in their learning. You're sitting in L&D baffled because you're like, but we did so much training. How can they say they don't feel supported in their growth? What does it look like? Frustrated managers. It looks like an L&D team who are unable to prove their value. And instead, so what do you do when you can't prove value? You prove effort. So whenever you're using things like time spent learning, completion rate, look how many courses I bought or made, you're not actually demonstrating value, you're demonstrating effort. You're trying to say, I have been doing work, I've not been sitting there idle. Now, what we're seeing is the missing link in learning being able to connect with the business is skills. Now, why? And we saw this in the chat itself. Skills is essentially a shared language that everyone in the business understands. You go to an individual and say, you don't have the skills to be able to progress in your career, they get it. You go to a CEO and say, we don't have the skills to achieve OKRs A, B, and C, they get it. Whereas if you turn around to them and say, people have been doing 40 hours of learning every month, they don't care and they don't get it. And what it does is it's a shared language, but it's also a shared context that helps us connect that. Now, before I go into how organizations are doing this, I just want to point out that this isn't new. And we're seeing organizations already do this to move from being a very operational admin function that's often undervalued and underfunded to a more strategic function that is valued and is able to have strategic impact on the organization. To give you a few examples, you've got Blackstone, one of the biggest funds in the world, who've introduced a skills-based career pathways. Now, what does that mean? Rather than hiring and depending on bringing in people who've got your kind of traditional qualifications and degrees, etc., now they're able to hire a more diverse workforce because they're investing in building the right skills they need within the organization itself. So they've resulted in a far more diverse and inclusive workforce, but also it's been far more cost effective for them to bring in the right skills into the organization. at HowNow, we work with the UK government, where the UK government have got a government skills campus that essentially helps people build the skills that they need to be able to do their job, but also to enable mobility across the entire civil service. And this has been a key piece. You've got TomTom. You've got an incredible initiative around delivering real-time HR, which is about meeting the needs of every employee with exactly what they need from a HR perspective. And they're extending that to offer real-time L&D. But the way they do that is by understanding what skills the business and individuals need to be able to connect them with the right learning opportunities. But this isn't just about upskilling and reskilling in the general sense. It also plays into your onboarding and also compliance. Because essentially, with all of these different types of learning, we're trying to make sure people get the right type of skills to be able to do their job properly. And so we've got operatics here who are able to ramp up and get SDRs to productivity far quicker by taking a more skills-based approach where they're targeting role-specific skills. So what does the playbook look like for this? So let's go back to my beautiful pyramid. And so what you get here is the first step. And, it's a great point that Penny was mentioning, where it's not an afterthought, the problem that you're trying to solve. Actually, it's the first thing that we need to be looking at. Now, what we need to do is start off by aligning on those business objectives that already exist. Your business already has those objectives. What you need to do is prioritize which ones do we need to focus on as a learning and development team. So let's look at my example here. We might have an objective here which says we want to increase customer retention rates by 15%. Now, the next step in this is, once you've got that buy-in around the objective that you want to improve, is to identify what roles are going to have the biggest influence on these objectives, and then trying to understand what are the capabilities and skills that these roles need to have in order to be able to achieve that objective. Now you know what they need to have, you then need to understand what do they actually have. And this is where you need a way of measuring and assessing people's skills proficiency. Let's say I need someone to be at a level 4 in problem solving, but actually everyone who's in this role is sitting at an average level of 2. And so where you would get it now is, I know I need to work on problem solving and empathy within these particular teams and roles in order to be able to achieve that business objective. Now what you have is, you look at your learning initiatives, and you need to map these learning initiatives to the skills that they would help you deliver. This could be anything from tailored learning pathways to resources that you want people to be able to find themselves. But what you should be able to do by activating your learning ecosystem, so this is everything from your blogs, your podcasts, coaching, any of your synchronous, asynchronous stuff, to be able to map that to the skills that you want to be able to drive. And the final step of this is where you're then able to connect those dots. You're able to look at these learning initiatives. Were they getting engagement from the target audience who needed to engage with my workshop on active listening and my resources around conflict resolution? Were we, from checking in with them and assessing their skills, were we able to see a meaningful improvement in the skills that we needed to be able to achieve those objectives? Your ROI story is really, how much money did it cost you to be able to bring these learning initiatives to life? And what was the uplift that you saw from achieving those objectives? By connecting these dots, what you're able to do is tell an impact narratives that brings all of these blocks together to be able to tell that value story back to your organization. Now, the obstacles we typically find, and we're going to break out shortly to understand what you would change in your organization, but working across organizations, one of the key obstacles we find is they're just not set up to be able to connect those dots from learning skills to business objectives. And it's unsurprising, because we live in a crazy world where you've got learning all over the place. You've got some in your LMS and some inside blogs and some inside your SharePoint and your OneDrive. And we live in a crazy world where skills live inside a spreadsheet. And we wait for an annual training needs analysis to figure out what we should be doing in our function. And it takes us weeks to just figure out what time people have spent learning. And we can't still answer whether they spent that time on role-specific learning or not. So it's unsurprising that many of you are saying there's so many obstacles to be able to demonstrate value. And this is where what I want to leave you with is what we see as the tech infrastructure for this. You need a way to be able to bring all of this scattered learning together into one platform that allows you to then connect this right learning with role-specific skills. That's critical. You need a way to be able to connect the right learning opportunities that you've already spent time and money on with the skills that someone in role needs to be able to do their job well today. But there's no point trying to drag them to where you are. Instead, what we need is a way where they can access these learning opportunities and resources, as they say, in the flow of work. We need to embed the access in existing habits rather than forcing people to create new habits. And the data point. Now, right now, if you imagine, many of you are right now probably running multiple reports across different systems, and it probably takes you days or weeks to be able to understand what's working. And even then, it's probably quite an incomplete view of what someone is learning. What you need is, in the same way you need to bring all your learning together and centralize it, you need to centralize all of your reporting and your insights so you get a complete picture of what someone's learning and whether it's aligned to the skills and growth you want to drive. Now, we're not going to send you into breakout rooms, but we are going to have a discussion right here now, given time. But what we do want to understand is you've discussed the obstacles. We'd love to hear a bit more around what do you think you would change in order to be able to connect learning to business outcomes. What do you think might get in the way of changing that? I'd love to hear, or anyone who has seen any success with changes they've made.
Yeah, and I think changes is a lot. We could change a lot of things. I'd say, what one change would you like to make it easier to make that connection between learning and business outcomes? And as Nelson says, if you've got a story you want to chat about, please share it. Elmarie's hand's gone straight up. Let's bring her in. What would you like to share?
Clearly, it's evident that I do have a lot of challenges. So we are HowNow users. Our company does use the HowNow platform. However, what I'd like to see is an analysis tool within the HowNow database, not just a content library that I can get accessibility to everyone, but something that can actually speak to my employee database, which could capture employee numbers, employee details, that I can link to job profiles, at the same time can bring back an analysis to say, in this specific job description, I need that specific type of onboarding or skills required for the next 12 months, etc. So anything that could give me an analysis tool to do dashboarding or something that I can do forecasting and planning on, pretty much reporting as well, rather than having to plot it on a spreadsheet.
And Elmarie, you
sorry, you go, Nelson, go on.
Yeah, and you absolutely can do this. And one of the things we do for a lot of organizations, so I'd love to pick up this conversation straight after this to go how we can support you on that. But, some of the organizations we showed is exactly that, to be able to identify, here are the roles, what skills do they need to have, and what proficiency level do they need to be at? And then you can start to track that over a period of time to make sure people are role ready and getting the skills they need to be able to do that job without depending on a spreadsheet. So let's definitely pick that up.
Thank you very much.
It's very interesting because Jonathan has said the same sort of thing, defining the behaviors and skills associated with business outcomes as inputs. So understanding what it is that we need to alter and the behaviors that we need to alter, and then linking those to training. It's not, I don't think it's a trivial task. I want to come back and ask you about that, Nelson, in a second, but Lee's got another question for us, or another point. Lee, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, I think for me, I don't know that it's about systems making things easier to connect learning to business outcomes. I think to meet learners where they are, we've got to use the platforms and applications that they use every day and make sure that learning is available through there. But connecting it back to the outcomes is around not necessarily just about the data that we're looking at, but it's about having the leaders across the organization understand what this learning is contributing, what the solution, what the intervention is contributing to their outcomes, because the more that they understand that contribution or the purpose of what we're trying to achieve with that, they're going to engage more with it, and they're going to support providing that data. Going, you know, we're stuck with this. This is what it's showing us. It's not going to be an endless battle against those that, and I see it here all the time, the solutionizing.
Yeah.
We're coming, we've got this problem, we want to do it this way.
Yeah.
But actually, yeah.
And Lee, it's so true. I mean, there's not one silver bullet here, right? And I think one big chunk of it is what you're talking about, which is the change management piece. And we were touching on this earlier around, you know, L&D requires a rebrand. You know, if you've always been doing things a certain way, and now you're talking about value and building the right skills, and that requires a change of perception and taking people on that journey. But on the flip side, what you also need to have is, it goes back to the point around not doing things because they're too hard, right? And actually the use of AI, and Don's obviously got a great report on how people are using AI. And what it evidently shows is we're using AI to do the things we're already doing, right? So we're climbing that hill. That was an easy hill for us to climb already, and now we're using AI to climb that, versus leveraging AI to climb those higher peaks that we were afraid, or it was just too hard to climb. And I think that's where making sure you have the right tech stack and you're leveraging AI in the right way takes out the unnecessary friction for you to take on those bigger challenges, which will enable you to take people on that journey.
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to Lauren's point in the chat, which is, we're about to start an organization-wide learning needs analysis. Getting frontline managers to see the value in doing this would make life so much easier. Now, there's so much behind that, and it's a real issue for a lot of people. But this idea that managers are crucial for the implementation of any learning approach is vital, because managers decide how people spend their time. Nelson, what's your take on that? You work with a lot of companies. How do you get the managers on board?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I just want to echo the fact that managers probably are the most important piece in for you to drive adoption and engagement, and to get the results that you want to see. And so the question is, how effective have you been at enabling your people manager? And I don't mean saying, yeah, you should be supporting the development of your person. This person is also, that's not the enablement we're talking about, right? Like, in terms of, even if you look at a lot of the tooling to support learning and development, quite often is over-engineered for the L&D person, right? And so you have a kind of over-engineered platform for the L&D person, which you can't expect someone where L&D isn't their day job to come and figure out how they're going to use this platform. So how accessible are you making it for them to get the insights they need? And then it's defining what are those insights that are going to help them, right? Again, we've seen many organizations where think just sharing time spent learning with a people manager is enough for them to be able to have a constructive development conversation. It isn't, right? It doesn't tell me anything. And so it's really thinking about what insights can I arm the manager with? And so a time poor manager can have a real constructive conversation, and then be able to follow through for those actions. So we actually see a blocker at that initial stage, where managers are just not getting access to the insights that can help them have those better development conversations.
I'm looking at my clock and I'm realizing we've got 3 minutes left, and people keep bringing up great points. Ellie has just said, if we could agree on a standardized way of measuring proficiency, that would help us link back to business outcomes more effectively. That would be great. I think it's unlikely to happen, but there are standard methodologies or standard approaches, such as getting jobs done, the way of doing task analysis. I think that I just want to come back to this management piece, because we talked right at the beginning about the importance of managing, of marketing and promoting a vision of what L&D can do. I think that it's crucial when we think about that we don't go to managers and try to sell L&D, but rather we go to managers and we try to give them something that helps them do their job better. And if you do that, then you're marketing in the right way. You're helping people, you're giving people something valuable, rather than trying to force them to do something which they are maxed out and can't do. We've got 2 minutes left. I'm gonna shut up, which is unusual for me. I'm gonna ask Nelson to give his final views on this and then to wrap it up and take us home. Nelson, what do we need to do?
John, I don't want it to finish. There's so much good stuff coming in the chat, and we want to continue the chat. Who knows? Maybe we'll set up another session to continue it. But it's really, really refreshing. And I think one takeaway for me, at least, reflecting on this, is how common our challenges are. There's so many different industries. We're in different parts of the world. But actually, the things that we consider challenges and obstacles are quite consistent across the conversations that we're seeing. And I think it's clear where we need to get to. I think everyone's aligned on what this promised land looks like. But I think it's understanding what are those obstacles and how we're going to build that momentum. And one thing I'd leave with, what we've seen work really well, is to think big, but start small. Right. Quite often we try to do too much too soon. And that's always harder to get buy-in for, and it increases the level of risk. And so there's one thing you take away is really to have a think about, how can I start small today? I get the big vision, I get where we need to go to be able to demonstrate this value, but what's the one thing? Maybe it's starting with a small group of people. Maybe it's mapping just a few of your critical roles and really mapping and measuring the skills for those roles. Maybe it's picking one business objective. There's a bunch of different ways where you can start small. But I just want to close off by saying a big, big thank you to the Pope of L&D himself. Also the James Bond of L&D.
Oh, stop it. That was a long time ago.
Donald Taylor for joining us and sharing his insights. Definitely read the report. It's full of great insights. And thank you for joining. I'm Nelson. If you want to find out more about HowNow, there will be a link in the chat. We're more than happy to just share stories around what we've seen organizations who've overcome similar type of challenges to what we've discussed today. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or drop me an email. Don has also shared his LinkedIn, so you can find him there too for all of the great insights he shares. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, guys. See you again soon, I hope. Bye for now.